Recording. There we go. Hi, good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for joining us. We're just waiting for folks to get settled in. Michelle, next slide, please. So welcome to today's webinar, Flourishing at Work, a helping plan for professionals. This is session 1 in this series, and making myself a priority. This webinar will be hosted by myself, but facilitated by Dr. Michelle Zechner. This webinar is sponsored by the Northeast and Caribbean Mental Health Technology Transfer Center, or MHTTC. We're housed at Rutgers in the School of Health Professions in the Department of Psychiatric Rehabilitation and Counseling Professions. My name is Kathy, and I'm the project coordinator of the center. We'll be facilitating this webinar today. Next slide, please. The MHTTC is funded by SAMHSA, the Substance Abuse and Mental Health Services Administration, to enhance the capacity of the behavioral health and other related workforces to deliver evidence-based and empirically supported practices to individuals with mental illnesses. We ask that you please visit the MHTTC website for additional information at mhttcnetwork.org. Slide, please. And if you're interested in staying up to date with the events and products that Northeast and Caribbean MHTTC is providing, we ask that you please sign up to receive our email communications. You can sign up on using the bit.ly link that you see on the screen. Then following this webinar, you'll be asked to complete a brief survey. We ask that you please complete our short survey, since it will help us improve our activities and inform our future activities. They're also important because our continued funding is linked to the completion of these surveys. So we thank you in advance for your feedback. Next slide, please. We also want to let you know that this webinar is being recorded and will be posted to our website along with presentation slides or any relevant handouts or resources in the next few days. Next slide, please. This presentation was prepared for the Northeast and Caribbean Mental Health Technology Transfer Center under a cooperative agreement from the Substance Abuse and Mental Health Services Administration. All material appearing in this presentation, except those taken directly from copyrighted sources, is in the public domain and may be reproduced or copied without permission from SAMHSA or the authors. Citation of the source is appreciated. Do not reproduce or distribute this presentation for a fee without specific written authorization from the Northeast and Caribbean Mental Health Technology Transfer Center. This presentation, again, will be recorded and posted on our website. At the time of this presentation, Miriam Delphine-Brittman served as Assistant Secretary for the Mental Health and Substance Use at SAMHSA. The opinions expressed herein are the views of the speakers and do not reflect the official position of the Department of Health and Human Services, or SAMHSA. No official support or endorsement of DHHS or SAMHSA for the opinions described in this presentation is intended or should be inferred. Next slide, please. We encourage you to interact with our presenters during our webinar by using the chat feature. Please post any comments or questions you have in the chat, and I will collect your questions as we go and ask them of the presenter during the Q&A time towards the end of the presentation. During the webinar, our presenter may pose questions to you. So we please ask that you use our chat feature to answer those questions. Next slide. The MHTTC network uses affirming, respectful, recovery-oriented language in all activities. This includes language that is strength-based and hopeful, accepting of diverse cultures, genders, perspectives, and experiences, language that is healing-centered and trauma-responsive, language that invites individuals to participate in their own recovery journeys, language that is person-first and free of labels, language that is non-judgmental and avoids assumptions, language that is respectful, clear, and understandable and consistent with our actions, policies, and practice. So now let's begin our webinar. We have Dr. Michelle Zechner with us today. Dr. Zechner is an assistant professor at Rutgers in the Department of Psychiatric Rehabilitation and Counseling Professions and has focused her career on the promotion of health and wellness for people with mental health conditions, their families, and the staff who support them for over 25 years. She has worked in a variety of settings, including academia, outpatient mental health programs, family advocacy organization, psychiatric hospitals, nursing homes, and training services. She conducts research, teaches, and mentors students, and consults with state psychiatric hospitals on the implementation of evidence-based mental health practices. She is also involved in family advocacy in New Jersey. So now I want to welcome everyone again, and I'll turn it over to our presenter.
Thank you so much, Kati. It's so wonderful to be with everyone today. I really appreciate that you're here. And I'm so glad that you took the time out of your schedule for you and that you're here today with me to think about making yourself a priority. I'm hoping we're going to cover a few things today. The first is to explore the relationship between self-care, compassion fatigue, and burnout. And the second is that we're going to talk about some of the supports, practices, resource, attitudes, and beliefs that can promote resilience and flourishing for helping professionals. And lastly, we're going to talk about putting those pieces together and the importance of developing a personal plan, which is really the goal of this entire 6-part series. This is part 1. Glad you're on this journey with me. And we're going to focus on the most important resource that you have, and that's yourself. Each session, we're going to cover a topic together, and then I'm going to ask you to consider some actions to take. At the last session, we're going to put all of these areas together into a personal plan for resilience and flourishing. So before we get started, I invite you to take a breath with me and pause. Thank you. Helping professionals are really well equipped to support others, but sometimes we have difficulty helping ourselves. I don't know if you experience that, but I certainly do. We go to school to prepare ourselves to help others and our careers and making sure that other people heal and grow and learn, but we're not always so good at helping ourselves. Speaking personally, often the same things that make us excellent helpers, like wanting to help, commitment to making the world a better place, and putting other people's needs as a priority, also means we sometimes struggle with ensuring our own needs are met, and we may have less dedication to our well-being. So I'd ask for you to first start by thinking about what making a priority means to you. I'd like to hear from you, so put it in the chat. Thinking about making yourself a priority, I hope you'll think about how you might make yourself a priority at work. For example, you might make sure that you take a break at some point in the day, that you give yourself a moment to prepare for the next meeting, task, or client or student, that you try to have some self-compassion when things don't go the way you want them to. And even thinking about the priorities you have for yourself at home. Maybe like you try to give yourself some transition time between work and home, or you make sure that you have the basics. So when you think about making yourself a priority, what comes to your mind? So go ahead and just turn to your chat and start typing. What makes you feel like you are a priority in your life? Is it making sure that you've got that cup of coffee first thing in the morning? Or does it mean that you follow up on dental care or preventative care appointments? Or is it something completely different? Place your thoughts about making yourself a priority in the chat. I'd really appreciate it. I've given you some of mine. I give myself a little transition between work and home. Oh, great. I see someone says making time for medication. Sorry, medication, I apologize. Meditation, absolutely. Some time to take a breath, to pause, to reflect. That's a wonderful way to make yourself a priority. And I know it can be a really hard thing to start on these actions. Also, people are responding, trying to enjoy the moment and being present, getting 10,000 or more steps a day. That's wonderful. Making time to leisurely read. That's really, really wonderful. And coloring. Oh, lovely. Those are really wonderful things. I love the diversity. And it's really important that we remember that we're all different, right? And how we need self-care and how we make ourselves a priority and give ourselves that time. So thank you. And I want to thank all of you for the work that you've done to help vulnerable people, adults and children in healthcare settings and education and mental health. we've had an incredible year and an incredible pandemic the past 2 years. It's not an easy time to be a helping professional who supports other people. Our experiences during this time are valid, whatever they are. As we know, there have been transitions, changes in the way we do our work and live our lives. Some of us have had health issues, lost loved ones, or been affected by recent extreme societal events. Some of us have experienced joblessness. Others have witnessed extreme situations in our work. And we're all being asked to do more during extremely difficult situations. We also know that we keep showing up and helping others. This ongoing crisis has tapped many of us out, depleting our energy and drive. Now it's time to consider how to step out of crisis mode and into a way of life that can make us stronger, more resilient, and able to flourish despite the difficult work. Helping others is amazing. I know that it's been my vocation and passion for my entire career. It's powerful, it's life affirming in wherever we're helping people. It offers intellectual stimulation, emotional gratification, and an opportunity to literally change the lives of other people. But while helping others and the benefits this offers continues while we work, it can also create stress and disillusionment, sometimes compassion fatigue or even burnout. Our interactions with others are the critical component of helping others. What other job can you think of that literally we use ourselves as part of the product, right? We are the product. We are talking to people, encouraging people, motivating people, helping people every single day, which puts a lot of pressure on us. And it may make us feel like our own needs are less important or take a back seat to the person that we're in the middle of helping. And as we witness other people's distress and trauma, we may experience a condition of extreme tiredness. This is called compassion fatigue, and it may be brought about by a stressful workplace or environment. According to WebMD, this form of fatigue is sometimes called secondary stress reaction, secondhand shock, secondary traumatic stress, or vicarious trauma. So we're at that high risk of experiencing those things because we're helping people every day. Compassion fatigue occurs when these things can trigger us and our moods and our well-being, and we start to feel our thoughts, moods, and well-being outside of work being affected. It's normal to be affected by our work, but when we take it home and we can't get it out of our head, that's when we know we're experiencing compassion fatigue and burnout. So, what impacts our ability to be resilient to combat some of that compassion fatigue and burnout? Well, first of all, there's these interactions between different things. These are qualities that help us be resilient and flourish, and it predicts our ability to fight off compassion fatigue and burnout, as I mentioned. One area is our own sense of priorities. Think for a moment. What are some of your priorities? Are you a priority for yourself? If taking care of me and preventing compassion fatigue and burnout is not my priority, then I might not give the same time and attention needed to it. In the next session, we're going to explore values and priorities and what's really important to us to remember why we're doing the kind of work that we're doing. Another area that often impacts us are work factors like job control, work setting, work environment, job demands like caseload or support or supportive supervision. And then personal factors, things like our own mental health and well being and our history, how we react to others in distress, our coping or mindfulness ability, and our resources and supports, which we're going to talk about in a little bit. And then lastly, we do have to consider recipient factors. So we're helping people, right? And the people that we help may be in crisis. They may have mental health conditions. They may use substances or have cognitive issues. And or they may not be that interested in improving or have some ambivalence about making their lives better, which can really put us at risk for greater burnout when you work with people who are not that interested in making changes. So knowing all of those things is very important in terms of our own risk for resilient or risk for compassion fatigue and our ability to be resilient. So in the chat, I'd like to hear from you. What are some things that impact your resilience and ability to flourish at work? So if you just take a moment, turn to your chat and type in the things of these, like your priorities, work, personal, recipient qualities that might impact your ability to be more resilient. And certainly another consideration that I do have to mention is that for people who are exposed to someone who has attempted or completed suicide, that significantly increases helping professions' own depression, anxiety, and PTSD. I see some things coming in: stress levels, lack of supportive administration, high caseload, level of stress at home. So there are things at home and how supportive supervisors are. And also the actions of leadership. So I see a lot of work factors, some personal factors, and I imagine that there are also some recipient qualities in there as well. So it's really a mix, and the number that you have can certainly put you at greater risk. Um, Having quiet time to be with thoughts, work environment, and self care. So, all of these things really are predictive of us being able to bounce back. So, you all may have heard of the Gallup polls. They do a lot of polls and look at worker well being and health. And in general, people are working harder. Since the beginning of COVID, their engagement at work has increased. We're more productive, but that greater work puts us at risk for burnout. In general, a CDC study found that 3 times as many US adults reported feeling anxiety and 4 times as many reported feeling depressed in June 2020 than in the same period as before. So we're less satisfied with our life and we have a higher risk of burnout. So, what can we do? We need to make sure that we have something that we're able to do to build our own readiness to promote our resilience and flourishing. So we can make our own well-being a priority. Someone put it in the chat that they're a caregiver, and I think that being a caregiver is another huge risk for burnout and compassion fatigue as well. So now we're going to turn to the strategies to flourish. We've been talking about trying to make yourself a priority, and flourishing is that sense of well being in all areas of life, including social or emotional, intellectual, and having a sense of balance and purpose and going beyond surviving. We want us to thrive. Helping professionals should be thriving. Um, this is a concept from Martin Seligman's University of Pennsylvania Positive Psychology Center, and he explored flourishing, and he emphasized that in order to flourish, we need positive emotions, engagement in our lives, positive relationships, sense of meaning, and recognition of our accomplishments. And another concept that's really important is using your strengths. All of us have strengths, and that we really can rely on those to get us through the day. So, to flourish, we also need to make ourselves a priority, to say, not being in a selfish way, but you know what? I am giving myself this minute to grab a cup of coffee or take a walk outside or take a brief breath. Also, using your supports. We're going to talk about that in a moment. And considering the attitudes and beliefs that you might have about these things is very vital as well, because if we don't feel like we have time for self care, if we don't feel like we are able to give ourselves that few minutes, that could be sort of a dangerous red flag that we're at risk for compassion fatigue and burnout. And then gathering our resources. I kind of like this slide because I like the idea that we're all kind of giving ourselves some self love and making ourselves a priority. So the best helpers really help themselves first. And in mental health, in fact, and a lot of other mental health professional guidelines that help others, it's really important that you help yourself first and you get the help that you need when you need it. If you don't help yourself, you can't help others. Remember that mask analogy on the airplane. We've probably all heard it 1,000 times, but it's true. If we're in a helping professional, uh, we need to put on our own oxygen mask first before we can help others with theirs. Another way to think about it is the care and concern we have for others. If our cup is completely empty, we have nothing left to give those who we help. So establishing boundaries can be useful, even if it's mental boundaries. I know I struggle from turning off my work thoughts when I'm not at work, and that's a boundary that I need to work on for myself. If you're on vacation, if you've gone home for the night and you're not on call, it can be really important to sort of shift your brain into rest mode. Also, being able to manage your energy. So, having energy when you need it and sort of targeting your tasks when possible to when you have energy. So, for example, my energy is best in the morning. So, if I have a heavy duty thinking tasks or if I have difficult things I need to do, the morning is best for me. In the afternoon, sorry guys, this is not my peak energy time. But I can do certain things to manage that energy that I do have by not spending too much energy in the morning so that I have enough energy for the next task ahead of me. Self care is really just about paying attention to and supporting your own physical and emotional well being. It's kind of a vague word, that self care, because it encompasses so much of what we do in our adult life, succeeding at relationships and work and meeting our basic needs. Self care really, I think about it as a verb, the actions that we take each day to live our best lives. What people do for self care can be endless. And thank you so much. You already uh, gave me some ideas of things that you do for self care. Um, and I also, as some of you may know, I love the 8 Dimensions of Wellness. It's put out by Dr. Swarbrick, Peggy Swarbrick, and SAMHSA has adopted it. I love thinking about my self care in terms of 8 dimensions. Things like emotional, physical, spiritual, intellectual, environmental, all those areas. What am I doing in those areas to think about my self care? I found some really interesting ideas as I was putting this together, thinking about the areas that you might need a little more self care. I think, and again, I sort of looked at it from this wellness perspective: physical, emotional, intellectual, vocational, spiritual, social, environmental, and financial. I'm kind of curious, or anything that I didn't say, what area of your life might need a little bit more self care? And you could just pop that into the chat. Um, I certainly think for me, it's probably a little more physical self care is something that I need to focus on right now. And there were some great examples that were offered. Like, one idea I saw that I thought was great was start a self-care idea collection. You all brought up coloring. It could be bird watching or walking or being outside, um, to remind ourselves of what we can do. Someone mentioned that emotional and physical are areas that they need a little more self-care in, and finding some time for yourself every day and learning to say yes or no more often, which can be hard. Sometimes saying yes to ourselves means saying no to something else. And assessing any of the trauma inputs that you're experiencing, that's important as well. But self care is really the place to begin. It nurtures us, brings up our energy, helps us with problem solving, self care, and it's really the foundation of staying resilient while helping others. When our self care is on the lighter side, then compassion fatigue and burnout can weigh us down. And alternately, if you do multiple things each day for self care or making yourself a priority, you have a lower likelihood of burnout and compassion fatigue. Being resilient and flourishing means that we really have to start the day out with self care every day. Another interesting concept about this is that if we start to notice compassion fatigue, it's a really interesting opportunity to rethink and rediscover what might create a sense of happiness, purpose, and joy in your life. When you think about your last week, it might be helpful to think what moments brought you a sense of resilience, meaning, or purpose. What were you doing? Who were you with? What was around you? So taking those little opportunities to remind yourself of those moments that create happiness and resilience for you. So we need to practice self-care every day. And one of the most important things to be aware of is how you're feeling in this moment. Take inventory of where things are at with you right now. What's on your plate? What's going on in your day? These things can influence how much and the type of self-care that you might need. A rough start to my morning might make me take a pause, listen to inspirational music in my car before I go into work, or maybe reschedule a difficult meeting. I like to think about it as a self-care prescription for myself, kind of like an exercise prescription, but a self-care prescription. And that means when I know I'm under a lot of stress, I say, okay, I can't just do one thing. I can't just take a moment and have a cup of tea and that's going to be my self-care moment. I know I'm going to need multiple. And if I'm really nervous, really anxious, a lot's going on, I'm going to have to do 3 or 4 things. I also know and I bet you all know things about yourself. Like when you're feeling very nervous or anxious, are there certain things that you do for self-care that make you feel better? So for me, physical movement always makes my anxiety better. So if I go for a walk, I go to the gym, I do some yoga, I'm feeling much better. However, if I'm feeling overwhelmed, overworked, those are things that are not going to necessarily help me feel better. I need something that's going to bring me, kind of bring me some peace. And I like to meditate or I like to spend some time with my pets. The, but the key to this is really the variety of self care depends on what's going on in your day and how much support you might need and assessing yourself and noticing if you're starting to feel tired or overwhelmed and being proactive, scheduling those things, calendaring can be a wonderful thing um, to make sure that you get enough self care in the day. So let's talk about support for a moment. Getting help, being resilient and making yourself a priority takes support from people around you. Gathering supports you need to accomplish a goal or achieve a task. So, we're going to talk about some of those supports and put them together in order to make ourselves a priority and foster resilience. So, think for a moment, who or what do you need when you make yourself a priority? I definitely need a cat, or I own 2 or 3. Who are you going to call? Like the Ghostbusters, you're not going to call. Who are you going to call? Or who are those people that can give you extra friendship, compassion, and ideas for being more resilient and making yourself a priority in some cases? It might be a family member or partner or your parents or other relatives. You can also get support from your coworkers or other people doing a similar job as yourself. You may find support from faith or spiritual communities. And of course, if you're significantly burned out, experiencing ongoing anxiety or depression that's impacting your life, then seeking out emotional support through counseling is really important. You can consider employee assistance programs with referrals to other types of programs and assistance for complex family situations. And sometimes support can even come from professional organizations. So I'm going to ask you to go back to the chat. Who or what is the biggest support for you? Just take a moment in the chat and type in who or what is the biggest support for you. Significant other, I see. Spirituality, I see. Significant other, family, friends, faith. Thank you very much, folks. Yes, all of those things are wonderful supports. And remembering that they are your supports and part of that toolkit for resilience. None of us are islands, right? And we all need additional help to become as resilient as we can be and flourish in our lives. So I don't know about you all, but I am a helping professional myself, and I've worked directly with helping people for a few years now. Um, but I'm not sure that I ever received a cape with my degree or my license. Did any of you receive a cape? I say this as a joke, of course, because we may have that feeling we're superheroes and we need to fix everything and do everything alone, and asking for help is really hard. It's really hard for me to ask for help. And I wonder if anyone else has that experience, that we feel like because we're helping professionals, we should never need help, that somehow in our minds, being a helper means that we never ask for help. And in those moments, it's so important to remember that asking for help is actually a strength. It's actually an important strength to helping others. Your supports can help you to stay resilient and flourish. Sometimes support can remind you to make yourself a priority. And when you're in that moment and you're about to make the ask, it's really helpful for your supports to understand exactly what you're asking for. I don't know if anyone else can relate, but my significant other, sometimes I want to tell him about something at my job. And I really just want him to listen while I vent without any suggestions. On the other hand, sometimes you may be in a very tricky situation at work and you need specific suggestions about next steps or strategies to manage anything at work. So knowing what you're going to ask is very important. And I've heard of SMART goal setting, but I'd never heard of asking for help in a smart way. And that's specific, meaningful, why you need it, action oriented, real, and time bound. So asking someone for a very smart type of request, type of help is really helpful to the helper. So if you're asking for help from your supports, to be specific in your ask. Um, so what are things that get in the way of you asking for help? I'm just kind of curious if you're like me and you struggle a little bit. I'll be honest, one of mine is my pride. I feel like I should be able to do this. I should be able to figure this out myself. And I'm not great at asking for help. And I'm curious if anyone else experiences challenges with getting help. And you can just pop that into the chat. Embarrassment. Yeah, as well. Feeling like I shouldn't have to be rescued. I shouldn't have to need help. And yet we all are human and we all need assistance. And someone has pointed out that it's harder to get coworker support now in the pandemic because we're in different places. We don't see each other as much face to face. Absolutely. And so then the question, I would ask, and I would wonder from a coaching kind of perspective would be, where could you get the kind of support that you want? That if you're not able to get it in person, where else would work for you? Someone else has mentioned not wanting to bother other people. I definitely feel that as well. Like, it's hard to ask for help. I don't want to bother people. And yet here we are in this field of helping. And I don't know about you, but almost every coworker I've ever asked for help has been happy to help me. And whenever any of my coworkers ask me for help, I'm happy to help them. So I guess it does depend on the culture of your work environment as well. In some settings, being helper is encouraged. In some settings, it's not necessarily. But it's important to think about if you need help, what might kind of get in the way. So asking for help is a great example of an attitude that supports our resilience and flourishing. As the sign says, our attitudes determine our direction. Having compassion for ourselves and recognizing that we might need help, just like the people that we are helping, means that when we get stuck, we allow ourselves to ask for help and receive help. So let's talk a little bit more about the kinds of attitudes and beliefs that are helpful for building our resilience. So attitudes, one attitude that helps make us a priority is being attentive to ourselves, noticing when we need a bio break or need to step away from a hard situation. I've done some flourishing learning communities with mental health communities, and they've told me, oh yeah, I don't ever take lunch. I never, let myself use the restroom until it's desperate. That kind of push, push, push means that you may feel on the edge all the time if you're uncomfortable, right? And it's important to consider being actively engaged in our lives, as well as an attitude for resilience, that we want to make a difference, that we want to continue to learn and grow. And of course, being hopeful that change um, can happen, that we can find some spark of hope in ourselves to grow resilience and flourishing. Hopelessness can mean that someone is experiencing symptoms of depression or burnout, and it may be time to seek professional help. So I encourage you, if you know someone who has experienced hopelessness every day at work, it may be time for that person to talk to a professional and get the kind of support that they need. Also, being motivated and optimistic, which goes along with hopeful, but feeling not only that we hope for changes, but we also feel like now is the time we want to try some actions that can make a difference in our lives, which is, I think, why most of you signed up for this series. I hope is that you're thinking, you know what, it might be time for something different in my life. Um, and having a positive attitude. Of course, positive psychology is focused on positivity, and Dr. Seligman's model of flourishing centers on the importance of positivity. And I think we have to really explain that and be careful about that word positive, because I'm not saying I'm encouraging everyone to be a Pollyanna and never think ever that, bad things happen, because we know bad things do happen, and sometimes we're in really, really difficult situations. But the idea of the positive attitude is you acknowledge where you're at. This is a difficult situation. There's a lot going on. And then have some hope that there can be some change, and look for some of the positives in the situation, just like we would reframe someone's difficult thinking, right? Like, that saying, there's a rainbow at the end of the rain. Um, trying to find some aspect of a difficult situation that has some redemption or meaning. It's really important, actually, for our own sense of bouncing back and being able to flourish in our own lives. Also, being thoughtful, sort of knowing what you think about these different ideas and self care, and a willingness to take some actions. I'd love to hear from you again in the chat. What are some attitudes that support making yourself a priority for you? What are some of your attitudes? I've listed a couple: attentiveness, engagement, hope. So it's important to be aware of the kind of attitudes that we carry around in our heads all the time, because those will either help us or will hold us back a little bit. Thank you so much. I see a comment of wanting to succeed. Absolutely. That is an attitude that can help. When you apply it to resilience, you could say, I want to succeed at being resilient. I want to flourish. And those are really, really important ideas as well. We talked about attitudes that are needed for building our resilience and flourishing. Now let's talk about the beliefs that we need in order to make ourselves a priority. First of all, I think we have to connect to the idea that self-care is important and necessarily, particularly for those of us who are in the helping professions. We have to remind ourselves that we're worthy of receiving support and help, just as those people that we are helping. Another belief that contributes to resilience is that a work-life balance is important. And I know that that's really challenging. Many of us take work from home, uh, go from work to home, and then take that work at home, and work at home on work. And it's particularly difficult when you have I'm sorry, I'm showing my age, but when you're on call, when you are responsible and covering a certain segment of time. I was going to say beeper, but then I realized no one has beeper anymore, right? Or maybe they do. I don't know. But that's a lot harder to set limits of work-life balance when you're on call, on the strange hours as well. But think about those moments when you could take a break to take a break. If you're on vacation, I am so guilty of this, checking my email My husband calls me out all the time, says, "You're not checking your work email, are you?" When we're, at the beach or we're, with family. He's very strict with me, and it just could take me into a totally different headspace when I get that email about work. So thinking about that balance of what you can do um, to separate them slightly and live a life separate from work. Also, a belief that you could take a small step towards improving your resilience. And what I'm talking about is not like, the idea that you're going to go out and tomorrow you're going to be, just meditating 3 hours a day and running marathons and sitting on top of a mountain. That's not at all what I'm talking about. I'm talking about those small steps, like, the group that I was working with, who literally said they never like gave themselves a break to have lunch, and they worked through lunch every single day. So the big small step that they took, uh, someone there, was literally to just take a 10-minute break and step outside and eat their lunch outside. And that doesn't sound very big, but it made a big difference to that person to give them a little bit of mental break in their day. And also believing that you can take those small steps to improve your resilience, knowing that you have the capacity to make change and you can make those little changes that will make a big difference, and having some self compassion. And then I encourage you to think about the kinds of beliefs that you need in order to improve your resilience. Just think about that for a moment. So, resources are those internal and external things that can help us be more resilient and flourish. And you can think about them as kind of a set of tools that you can use to support the tasks and projects you want to achieve. They can also supply you with what you need in order to overcome obstacles, challenges, and problems. An interesting idea is to make a resilience resource list that is a list of the things that help us make ourselves a priority, the things that nourish our well being, remind us to do self care practices, and give us energy to continue our work. Now more than ever, creating a list of things that build your resilience and contribute to your well being is helpful to prevent compassion fatigue and burnout. Stress can make us forget we need self care, what our strengths are, that we are amazingly resilient, all of us are, and even the things that make us feel better. Knowing what works ahead of time can be really helpful to build our resilience. So as we think about the resources for resilience, prioritizing your own well-being through self-care is definitely got to be the first item on the list. Another one is to use your strengths. In the resource section, which Kati will send out the slides, I've included a link to the VIA character survey, which I think is wonderful because it identifies it has 24 strengths and it identifies what we're best at, and reminding ourselves of those strengths can really be powerful to remind us of our resilience, of how we move forward in the day. And when we get to use those strengths at work, at home, it gives us a sense of joy and flourishing like nothing else. And also knowing that you have skill sets. All of us have crazy skill sets, wonderful skill sets. And I imagine that if you're a helping professional, you probably have some wonderful communication skills and problem solving skills, maybe negotiation skills. Knowing that you already have those in your pocket ready whenever you need them is important, to know that when you have a difficult situation, you can pull them out. Also, the coping strategies. You all gave me some wonderful examples of things that you use to cope with difficult situations. And I would just say it's amazing what we can do. And considering the coping that we need for positive resilience. So some of my coping strategies, like eating too much or spending too much time on TikTok, those are not things that actually build my resilience. Sometimes they wear me down, and they're very attractive. When I got that plate full of cookies, it's very hard to say no. And when I want to see the next cat video on TikTok, it's very tempting. But I have to remember that those are not the things that build up my resilience and flourishing. Um, I have other things that can do that, and I bet you do too. And then many of you mentioned the importance of getting good supervision or feedback, and those are also really wonderful things for resilience. So when you think about your resources and how you can flourish, I thought about my own example of the resources I have for work, home, and my attitudes. And I came up with my own list of things that are my resource list that can help me build my resilience. And I'd encourage you to think about the resources that you have. If you want, drop them in the chat. What are your resources for work or home? Or what attitudes do you have that can drive you towards flourishing? So, looking ahead, this is a series that is about building resilience and flourishing. So, this is session 1 out of 6. They're each an hour long. And we'd like for you to start identifying intentions for flourishing, build a plan, start taking some small steps to make that intention a reality and increase your sense of resilience. I hope to help you build a personal resilience plan at the end of this and to help you feel that you've made yourself a priority. Someone has pointed out that self-compassion is key, and absolutely, that is a resource that cannot be overstated. Is having self-compassion as you think about flourishing and resilience is critical. Um, you can't support others 100% of the time and expect your own emotional and physical health to keep up. It's hard work. And while I'm asking you to consider new perspectives and actions to take, these are things that can have an immediate effect on your well-being and ability to be resilient. Imagine just a small jump, 5 or 10% in your ability to flourish. That could make a big difference in how you feel at the end of the week. Knowing you want to take a step forward and take some action is important. But then we have to actually ask ourselves, what is it that we can actually do? In each session, I'm going to ask you to consider one small area and pick something to practice. In this section, we focused on making yourself a priority. Let's imagine for a moment that you're thinking, why, yes, Michelle, I would like to try and make myself more of a priority. Yay. What would you be doing? That's a great question to start with. And some other practice opportunities. How do you make yourself a priority? What help do you need? What gets in the way of making yourself a priority? And what's one action you're going to try to make yourself a priority? And I would love it if you would check in with yourself once a week, whether you write down some notes on a sticky pad, or you jot down in a journal, or you document on your phone, some things that you're doing to make yourself a priority. Maybe you took a lunch, or maybe you allowed yourself 5 minutes between clients or students, or maybe you even set a work boundary and you said no. It'll be different for all of us. But the most important thing is to reflect a little bit and let yourself notice when you make yourself a priority and when you don't. I'm going to end the session in a moment, but I want to leave that idea behind and say, make a point to make time for yourself this week. You matter. So we've covered a few things today. We've talked about the amount of stress and strain we experience as helping professionals. We've talked about the importance of making ourselves a priority and how that really does improve resilience every day. And that self-care can build our resilience and reduce burnout as well. And that supports often provide the drive and motivation for making ourselves a priority and being resilient. And our resources can keep us going. So this series is one, as I mentioned, out of 6. The next session will be in roughly 2 weeks, December 14th from 2 to 3. And we're going to be talking about purpose and meaning, or why am I doing this work? And I want to, before we turn it over to question and answer, I just want to remind you about the practice opportunities. So take a moment and think about how you're going to make yourself a priority in this week. What will you do? What's one thing you can do? And check in with yourself. All right. And I see some people have already started coming up with some ideas. Someone's going to start journaling again. That's a wonderful way to check in with yourself, and express your emotions and get some frustrations out and work through difficult emotions. And someone says, take a healthy, expensive lunch treat on paydays. Oh, nice, nice. Having lunch is a really good thing to do. All right, let's turn it over to questions at this stage. I don't know, Kati, do we have any questions?
Not at this time. I think we have more wonderful feedback and comments as you went along regarding their ideas for self-care, and also how the pandemic has been impacting their ability to have self-care. But at this time, like Michelle said, if you could take a moment, and if you have a question, you can share it in the chat box, or in the Q&A pod. But Michelle, in the time being, I do have a question of my own. I heard someone in the chat say, I feel like self-compassion is key. Could you speak to that as to why is self-compassion key in self-care?
Oh, thank you, Kati. That's a great question. There's a researcher named Kristen Neff, and she has something called mindful self-compassion. And she's got some wonderful meditations and books on her website. And her last name is Neff, Kristen Neff. But having self-compassion really allows us to be human, to be imperfect, to make mistakes, and feel like the world won't crumble if we make a mistake, because we are going to be compassionate with ourselves. I don't know about anyone else, but I'm a bit of a perfectionist. And when I make mistakes, I can hear in my head, oh, you should have done that. And how come you did this? And why did you do this other thing? And this is really awful. Those are the kinds of thoughts that don't necessarily help us to be more resilient, right? But if I'm compassionate and I have those kinds of thoughts of you should have done this, you should have done that, I could sort of be kind to myself, just as I would if my very best friend came to me and said, oh, Michelle, you wouldn't believe what I just did. I did this and that and the other. And then I can offer that compassion to them and say, wow, it sounds like you were under a lot of pressure. You were doing the best you could. You had a high caseload. You were at the end of your rope. Your children were sick. Your car broke down, and you showed up, and that was the minimum. So having that self-compassion is really, really important for mental health professionals, particularly and for all helping professions, because we all sort of think about how we help others, and not necessarily that we give ourselves some grace and forgiveness when we make mistakes.
Right, right. So, and so in other words, sometimes we have to learn how to release that rumination, and those ruminating thoughts that may not be so compassionate towards ourselves. I do see another question in the chat. Someone asked, what would you recommend for people working in environments that become overwhelming and unsupportive? For example, having a high caseload and a lot of students with childhood trauma and difficult family situations.
That sounds like a really tough situation. And I want to say thank you so much for the work that you do. And I'm not sure that there's any one right answer. What I would say is that for people in that kind of setting, you're at high risk for compassion fatigue. And what can, ask, sort of turning it around for yourself and saying, what do I need? What do I need? Is this a good fit for me right now? And if the answer is yes, then what do I need so that I don't take this trauma inside of me? Or is there something I can do to push back about the caseload? Or how can I think about the family situations that um, sort of remind me that I can be helpful. And at the end of the day, I have to sort of turn off my care, which is, I mean, so much easier said than done. Um, but I think it sounds like there's some good soul searching and reflection on what brings you joy about the job, and what makes it challenging, and what might you want to do um, to build your own resilience.
Thank you, Michelle. And we have another question in the chat. Any suggestions for working with the supervisor who is not supportive and who states that we're all under stress, in reference to coworkers who talk about stress impacting work? The person states that we have a job and need to be professional.
Yeah, that is really a challenge, and I think that, supervisors, and, I just I've done a couple of Flourishing series for supervisors this past year, and supervisors are kind of at the end of their rope, just as if, we are helping others, and then, our supervisors are also helping others and helping, trying to manage their teams. And that sounds like a very difficult situation to be in. I know that it can be helpful, again, to find the resources that are supportive to you at work. So if the supervisor isn't necessarily the most supportive person, then is there another person at your work site who can be a support? Or is there another professional organization or connection that might be helpful in this situation? While it's certainly true we have to be professional, the huge risk of burnout is that there's a lot of research that has been done about burnout. When people are burned out, sometimes um, folks overshare, actually. And so I don't know if the supervisor is thinking about that, or what they're thinking, but that doesn't sound like it's very supportive when we're all under a lot of stress. Sorry, I'm having trouble talking. We're all under a lot of pressure and stress right now. And I think that, again, having self-compassion, and I certainly try to model compassion to the people that I engage in, so the people I mentor, my coworkers, I try to have compassion for them and say, you're right, we are all experiencing a lot of stress right now. And what would be really helpful is to be thanked. Getting thanked sometimes is really helpful when you don't feel like you're being appreciated or seen. Well, thank you very much for your questions. I have some resources that you'll be able to see when you get the information from Kati, and we've got some references. And as always, I'm going to stop there and let Kati finish us off.
Thank you, Michelle. So on your screen, you will see our QR code for our short evaluation survey. I have also entered the link in the chat box if that's easier for you. We kindly ask that you please complete these surveys. We definitely appreciate the feedback about, how about the quality of the event of today. So, and we use this information to inform our future activities. So please know that it is anonymous, one, and number two, that we do take your feedback into consideration. Also, just as a reminder, I will email everyone the link to the evaluation survey. You will receive a certificate of completion for today's webinar for 1 hour. And you will also receive a link to the recording of this webinar, as well as the presenter slides within a week of today. So I just want to say thank you again to Michelle for providing us with this wonderful webinar. We truly appreciate all of the strategies and ideas for self-care, and of course, making ourselves a priority. We hope that you continue to stay safe and well. And once again, thank you everyone for attending today.
Thank you, everyone. Make yourself a priority. You matter.
Definitely. I hope everyone has a great rest of the day. Take care.